Hello, my friends, and welcome to Postscript. Nice to have you with us. We've got an interview here today with Teri Cochrane. Teri's going to be with us on the 20th of July at Transition Talks. And we first met her quite some time ago when Todd Ovakaitis was here. So hi, Teri, how are you?
Hi, John. Great to be with you in your audience today.
Yeah, it's really great to have you. And we're really looking forward to having you in July, because that's going to really be a fun Saturday. It's going to start at about 1 in the afternoon and go till 5 o'clock at night. And it's part of our monthly speaker series that we have called Transition Talks. And so it's really going to be fun. So for those of our audience who are not familiar with you, take a minute, if you will, and talk a little bit about your background. You've got a really interesting story about your kids and how you got in your business. And I think that it'd be fun to hear about that.
All right. So my story, I've had kind of a tale of two cities, if you will, two very different lifetimes in one life. I started out as an institutional risk manager and in commercial real estate. My last tour of duty in that vocation had to do with running the health of the assets of the multifamily portfolio for Freddie Mac. So I was a risk manager and was really good at my job. I understood risks. I looked at patterns. I'm a pattern recognizer, and I always sought a win-win solution for the developer and the borrower, and then us who eventually owned the mortgages that were then sold into the secondary market. And so life always is interesting, and you never expect it to do what you think it's going to do. And so with the birth of my first child, my son, by the age of 3, we were told to expect a broken child, that he would have brain seizures. At the age of 3, he had the bone density of an 18-month-old. He wasn't walking, he wasn't talking, he had life-threatening asthma. And so when you receive that type of data, you're like, oh, wow. First, you have to digest it and say, that's interesting. I'm going to be living with a broken child. And initially, I'm a rule follower. Initially, you think about, well, let's follow the rules that they're giving me to help support this condition for my son. But I soon learned that the rules were broken and that my son was only becoming ever more broken. And so I decided 2 years into his trajectory that I was going to take my own path for him, because the path that we were given was clearly not helping him. He was getting worse. And so I started deploying my risk management skills and my solution seeking skills, because I am a Cuban refugee. And we left everything on the island in the mid 60s and started over. And my parents always taught me to never be a victim of your circumstances, but instead seek a solution for what is before you, even though what might be before you is not necessarily
Right.
designed for yourself. Design something different. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I was unconsciously working with that patterning that creates something different than what is before me if what is before me is not what I seek. And so I took my risk management skills in real estate finance and institutional risk management. I deployed it to being a risk manager for my son's health condition. And he's now going to be 30. So many, many years ago, before the internet, before you could ask Siri how to get from point A to point B, I had to do some research through library books, through the observation of other children. I did a lot of interviewing with doctors and families, and over my kitchen table, I had an epiphany on my probably 75th book. It was Childhood Illnesses and the Allergy Connection. And in that moment, I had that tipping point, that Malcolm Gladwell's tipping point, where you have enough information that things change. And what I was able to understand is the food that I was feeding him was literally poisoning my son. And so within 4 days of eliminating certain foods, he started breathing, his allergic shiner started getting better. So I had started down this path of, oh, things might be different. If you change the inputs, the outputs may differ. And I became even more of a rabid researcher, even being called Dr. Teri at Freddie Mac, the place I served in my last tour of duty, because individuals would want to know about the allergies with their children and their husbands who had health conditions. And so I never really thought that I would be in the career that I am today, which is considered a pioneer in personalized and precision wellness, deploying really pioneering features in science. But it's my calling and my passion. And one thing led to another where I was called by a higher power to literally quit my job, even though I had an amazing career and I was doing very, very well in that company. I just knew there was something greater breathing through me that was moving me in a direction to really start deploying this to others. And so I went back to school, studied all sorts of everything, functional nutrition, functional medicine, biochemistry. And then I never stopped learning. And now 20 years hence again, I've developed what I believe is a beautiful model for the body after the namesake of my children, the Cochrane method, that seeks to understand the four portals of genetic expression that create disease, chronic illness, and imbalance in the body. And so I've had the privilege now of working with some of the most famous people in the world who are celebrities, A-line Hollywood, actors, athletes, and I also work with some of the most complex conditions, from cancer to infertility to autism to mental health to autoimmunity. We say no matter what your situation is, we will seek to find your solution simply and elegantly. And we've been really blessed to say that we have achieved not only really beautiful results, but sustainable results. So the body is a miracle machine. And somehow my life's trajectory led me to become this ever learner and a curious observer that then becomes what she learns.
But going back to your son, you were able to figure out that it was the food, and uniquely only the food, that was the problem, and be able to develop this kind of customized diet, if you will, for your son. And you did the same thing for your daughter, right?
I did, yes. With my son, it was the food, and then his adrenal exhaustion. With my daughter, that's what got me into epigenetics, which is the role of the influence of the environment on our genes. And in her case, she was a pre-professional ballerina, yet had a botched wisdom tooth extraction that sent her septic to the brain. And the antibiotic that saved her life then created a whole host of epigenetic expressions in her body. And she became extremely ill, and no one could figure her out. I even took her to an endocrinologist out in the Bay Area who's a specialist in women's health. And even that was not the solution. So that took me down the rabbit hole of epigenetics. And so what I found—
just 1 second here, but epigenetics is not just your environment writ large. It's really about your thoughts and your emotions and things, right?
Is everything. Absolutely, John. So in her case, we had a situation where pathogens had turned on the genes, and then her lifestyle as a ballerina, which I then have coined the ballerina syndrome for perfectionism, right? Where the body's in constant high alert because you have to be on your toes, literally. And she was dancing 8 hours a day, and then she was doing an international baccalaureate program. So her body was on constant high alert. And that high alert really contributed beyond the pathogens and the food to this epigenetic expression, which then had her not able to eat the foods that she was otherwise eating. So yes, absolutely. Epigenetics and the Cochrane method goes to not only pathogens, but the environment, which serves as food and toxins around us, but the emotional body. What is our environment? What are we thinking? What is our even familial DNA patterning that we may see? Yeah. The thought creates the thing. And in the perfectionism world of the ballerinas, and I've also worked with professional companies, is that you're always expected to be in this level of perfectionism, hitting it on the mark every time and asking the body more than it can do or should do. And so it really has this whole HPA, which is the fight or flight response, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis aspect, much like Navy SEALs, right? Much like extreme athletes. We're asking more than should be asked of the body, and for them to be on high alert, because you're a performer, basically. You know, if you're a Navy SEAL or you're trying to protect your country, you're always on high alert, seeking to where is that potential affront.
Oh, how did that work with pick either your son or your daughter? Was it a gradual thing over a long period of time, or was it rapid? What kind of a changes did you make in their diet, or how does that work?
Well, it was diet and supplementation. With my son, within 4 days of changing his food, we could start seeing a marked difference. And then we really understood that he had adrenal insufficiency. And so that was causing a tremendous histamine response in his body. And the fact that he'd been given all these drugs were really depleting his immune system. So as we were able to build his immune system, he ended up needing no pharmaceuticals. And now today, as a 30-year-old, he is in incredible health. And he just ran a half marathon. He was a junior Olympic gold medalist in karate. He was a varsity swimmer. So this broken body really became just a very amazing body and an amazing mind as well.
So how does this approach of yours, is this what you'd call a component of kind of functional medicine or something? How does this work?
Yes, I really think it's beyond functional medicine, to be quite honest with you, because functional medicine does look at the body as a whole. And then this approach, and again, I'm not a doctor, but this approach looks at the very granular aspects of how you are, where you are, and why you are based on your genetics and what is surrounding the environment. Now, in my son's case, the food was the poison to him. And the fact that he was born premature and that I had had a stressful pregnancy. So his little body came in with a lot of stress. And so there was this confluence of events. And so now what we see is we seek to understand every individual is an N of one. I'm not going to give one client the same thing that another client is supplementary or food wise, even if their external experience, let's say it's a diabetic. One person may be diabetic because they're having a high histamine response. The other person may be diabetic because they're having a strep autoantibody that's been reignited. So the way that you approach it is very different to one for the other. And so that's why our practice is so highly successful, is
Right.
that the method really gets to the root very quickly, and then we can unravel it equally quickly.
So do you have to do DNA testing or something?
So we do epigenetic analysis. So we'll look at your raw data and then we run it through my internal algorithm to see.
What does that mean?
So
Internal algorithm.
So I've developed a methodology to say, how do we look at these genes? There are many DNA companies out there, yet I believe that ours is quite different in the way that we look to understand the raw data and analyze it. It's based on my methodology. And so we look at genes as a symphony, each one striking a note. And we look at those, which are the highest notes. So for example, I look to understand what is your number one foundational vulnerability. So we look at the genes that you have the most variances in, and then I do it in descending order. I look at them in descending order because your number 1 through 6 variances are going to play much bigger role than your number 28 through 58.
Sure.
And so we also look at how do they intersect with one another, because the body is a system of multiple systems, each one playing each other's notes. So for example, if you have a histamine response, histamine is related to how you manage your neurotransmitters, which is another gene, which is then related to how you manage your hormones, which is another gene. So it's like bing, bing, bing. Everyone is a pattern working in satellites with one another. And I've developed a methodology that's really successful.
So do you start with a bunch of tests? Is that what you do? Or what's the process look like?
Good question. So generally what we do is we like to have an analysis of your DNA, and then we have a very intentional questionnaire that we have our clients fill out. And then we do an intake in the office based on the data that I have gathered. And then we do, in my office, we do applied kinesiology, and that is muscle testing kind of.
Yeah, I'm quite familiar with it.
Highly, highly effective. We call it real-time body intelligence. It's giving us real-time feedback.
Sure.
Gives us what's an imbalance in that pathogen. And what I love about this muscle testing, John, is that the genes are just our potentiality, but this muscle testing gives us real live information back. Is that gene affected in some way because it's out of balance? And then we
Right.
understand what created the tripping mechanism for that gene, and then find a solution in office with the adjunctive supplementation.
Yeah, I've gone through a couple of different sessions with, I don't know if you'd call them therapists, but people who use kinesiology as the basic kind of indicator of the process by extracting information. And it's been really quite profound in some cases. I mean, in one case, I remember I was laying on this massage table, and this guy quickly went through a bunch of questions and did the kinesiology, and he said, "Oh, on the 28th of May of 1997, something really important happened to you." And it took me a while. I said, I don't know. And I sat and thought, and I did. Suddenly it just blew up in my mind. I said, "Oh, that's when I had to fold my company and I had to lay off all of my people." And, and he found it right there. So I'm familiar with the effectiveness of that approach. So tell me a little bit, is this, you're familiar with the Hippocrates Institute, I'm sure. Tell me how do you and they kind of, the differences between that.
So the Hippocrates Institute, and I know them well. One of my clients just finished a 6 weeks run with them. They're an amazing.
Yeah, explain what they do.
So basically, the way I see them is they have multi-layered levels of detoxification for the body, right? They detoxify at the biochemical level. It's a complete vegan plan. You do juicing, but then they also detoxify the mind body. You have a lot of body talk, body feedback. There's meditation. There's EMDR. There's all sorts of spiritual components to it.
But it's all based upon food.
It's all based on food.
Right. And primarily about raw food, as I understand it.
Raw vegan food.
But it's a 28-day long kind of program, as I remember.
It is, and you can be longer. My client I was there for 6 weeks. She had a very significant situation. And so we worked collaboratively with the Institute in the sense that we were matching her genes. So some of what they were sharing with her wasn't necessarily suited. So we adapted. Some foods wouldn't have been her best choices.
But both of you kind of start with the idea that the solution to all your kind of physical body, at least, is the input, the food, right?
Absolutely, the input. And I say that food is the alpha and the omega, that it's the beginning and the end. You can get everything else right, but if you get the food wrong, food alone can express your genetics. Food alone can shift things to be in harmony or in dissonance, because food carries vibrational signatures as well. And then when you tie that to your genetic predispositions, food can flip your genes. And that's why dirty food creates genes. And our industrial farming has really been a terrible example of what we can do to our bodies if we're eating the wrong foods, the wrong dirty foods.
Now, what you're talking about is really quite not only interesting, but important, because in our business, I'm a futurist, and the Arlington Institute spend this time trying to think about what the new emerging world might look like, the new human and the new world. And so we're always on the lookout for the emergent kind of ideas that will blossom into something larger in the ensuing period of time, and become kind of the cornerstones or the major components of this new world. And what you're talking about is a whole different paradigm. I'd be interested in how you would characterize it, because it's really quite different from almost a philosophic point of view, from the conventional medical healthcare kind of notion that says, we got to give you all these additional kind of things. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So as you noted, the systems are breaking down. They are. Conventional medicine has clearly has its place. If you need a new heart, if you need legs, so there, what I believe is this is going to be a yes and. But in terms of chronic illness and understanding autoimmunity, and the top 5 killers in the United States are all nutritional diseases: heart disease, stroke, diabetes, cancer, and Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Okay. These are all metabolic diseases. And so our world, our conventional allopathic medicine model just doesn't understand how the inputs, back to your point earlier, affect the outputs. And I work very closely with futurists like Dr. Todd and some real genius doctors like Dr. Zach Bush out of actually was out of UVA, who has been a real voice in our, and Bruce Lipton, Dr. Bruce Lipton, whom I adore, is that Bruce says we're headed for our 6th mass extinction. Dr. Zach Bush is sharing that we are a microcosm of the macrocosm, and we're experiencing what our Earth is experiencing with dirty air, dirty water, dirty soil, dirty food. He just noted recently that 53% of males are now infertile. Why is that? Well, because we're creating a toxic environment that has a very, very, very deleterious aspect on our endocrine system. The microplastics and the glyphosates in particular have done a number on our bodies. It's also doing a number on the quality of our food. The average American consumes 5 pounds of pesticides every year. Most of those pesticides convert into xenoestrogens. Xenoestrogens, I call it kryptonite estrogen. These are cell proliferators, they're cell disruptors, they are endocrine makers, they're mental health blockers, because estrogen can also run amok, will also interfere with candida, which is a fungal organism that then will dislodge serotonin and dopamine, which are 2 very important neurotransmitters to mental cognition, feel good, sleep, which is super important for restoration, and happiness. So it's just this very big web that we have woven, and now it's time to untangle. We got to clean up from the inside out and then seek to understand how can we be better stewards of this new beginning, which is coming.
Well, it's really quite fascinating. How long does this process take?
So it depends on how complex the situation is. I work in stage cancer. I work with getting people on stage on the big screens, but I also work with mostly autoimmunity. We say unless you're extremely complex, we can figure you out in about 3 visits. We just had someone who had Hashimoto's and another chronic illness for 7 years, and after 1 visit, clinically, it was gone. It's food, it's supplements, and it's your life. We say what goes in you, on you, and around you. We're going to help you manage that. We just recently had a young lady, she was anaphylaxis. That means that the food or any environmental toxin around her could kill her. 52 food substances. She's now eating them all. That took a long time, but that's supposed to be impossible. Once anaphylaxis, always anaphylaxis. And this little girl doesn't have to live in fear anymore that the foods around her, even airborne particulates, could kill her before. What I have learned over these last 20 years, and I continue to learn, is that the body is this remarkable machine. And it's not even a machine, it's this highly infinite intelligence. The body is high infinite intelligence. And if we can learn to tune into those aspects of its highly infinite intelligence and understand it, it's constantly giving us feedback. So for example, I have a continuing glucose monitor, not because I'm diabetic. My metabolic flexibility for insulin is fabulous. I have a wonderful hemoglobin A1C, that of an athlete. However, I use this because it helps me understand what foods and at what time of day things can make my blood sugar rise.
Well, it's going to really be fun to have you with us. And what are you going to talk about while you're here in July?
Well, I'm going to talk about the 5 big disruptors in our beingness. We've got protein malabsorption, we've got sulfur malabsorption, oxalate, fat malabsorption, and now the new one is histamine, and that has a lot to do with the pandemic. All of these have to do with the pandemic and how we get back to being really resonant and living optimally in a very disruptive environment, both physically, biochemically, emotionally, socially, and how to bring our sovereignty back, how to erase the fear that was that was imparted into our subconscious over these last several years, and how to really be advocates and informed philosophers, really living a life that we love and that is possible, and is possible, especially in community.
Well, you and I are gonna have this lengthy conversation over the afternoon, and I'm going to make sure that it's really practical, so people really can understand these things, because you say a lot of big words, and
I'll make it super simple.
yeah, right. But no, it's really quite important, because some of us understand some of those big words, and we understand the logic and what it means, and that it gives credibility to the whole process. But this is really interesting and important stuff. And so I want to make sure that as many people as possible come and benefit from all of this. Where do you live? Where do you hang your hat, Teri?
I live in Northern Virginia, in Reston. So my practice is in Reston as well. So we're not far, but love the Metro DC area. I've been here for over 30 years.
Yeah, well, so just for people to have an idea about where you are, and how do they get in touch with you, or where do they find out about you?
Well, we have a big presence on social media. I have an Instagram channel. I've got my website that has a lot of data through my blogs. I'm on a lot of podcasts, really espousing a new truth. And then I've written a book called The Wildatarian Diet: Living as Nature Intended, which really seeks to match your genetic blueprint to your current state of health, so you can be vibrant and live optimally at any stage.
That sounds like a good idea.
I like it.
Yeah, right. Well, good. It's going to be really fun to have you with us, and I'd encourage all of our viewers who are watching this. This is going to be a very practical and profoundly important kind of new look into how, in kind of manageable terms, that everyday people can manage their lives through, as you suggest, diet and supplements and things. And this is not something that you can't do yourself. And so it's going to be great to see this new picture being painted in front of us about how to get from here to there. And so we're looking forward to it. So thanks.
Give you some real practical tips you can do at home to really, really increase the body intelligence. So.
Yeah. So thank you very much. We'll see you in July.
Looking forward to it.
Take care. Bye-bye.